Many of you know me, John Frissell. I'm former president at RCA. Barney Scholl is RCA's counsel, VP and counsel. And we have tonight Dr. Nathaniel Frissell, and he is a professor, and he is going to tell us a lot about ham sci. So without further ado, I will mention, of course, RCA being the oldest wireless society in the world, as far as we know, 1909, and we are having our annual meeting in Washington, D.C. this year in November, typically the weekend before Thanksgiving. And the technical symposium is lining up a lot of interesting speakers. So we really encourage everybody to attend because it's a great face-to-face way for people to get to know one another, and especially for some of our younger members to network with some of the more senior members who've been around a while. Because the name of the game, as we were just saying, is all about networking. So, Dr. Frissell, why don't you start off by telling us a little bit about your own background?
Sure. So my name's Nathaniel, W2NAF, and I got my start in radio when I was in 7th or 8th grade, and I went on a scout trip in a cold, wet, rainy October weekend in New Jersey, and it happened to be Jamboree on the Air weekend. And I'd never heard about ham radio before that, but it was cold and wet. We were at Camp Glen Gray in Mahwah, New Jersey, and Greg Nitkowski, N2BSA, had a ham radio station portable set up in the old guard cabin. And he just had a dipole antenna strung up in the trees and some basic HF equipment in there. And I went in and I just heard the crackle of the static, and I heard these voices coming from faraway places, and that just captured my imagination. And so it took me a couple years for me to actually get my license. I eventually, at the 1997 Scout Jamboree, I got the novice written part of my license done. I cram studied, and then a year later, I actually finished it with the technician written portion, and that got me started in ham radio. Then when I was in high school, I was very interested in ham radio, but I was also very involved in music in the band, and I was trying to decide between going to university for music education or for electrical engineering. And I actually chose music education because we just had a wonderful band director at Montclair State University. And so I went and pursued that. But while the ham radio and electrical engineering bug never really went away. So during the summers, and I was really into scouting too. I wanted to work at a scout camp during the summers, and I wanted to work at one that would actually let me do ham radio. So I found that Forestburg Scout Reservation up in just north of Port Jervis, New York. They had a technology center. It wasn't very well developed then, but they hired me and they let me teach radio half time and then basket weaving the other half of the summer. And so I took that job, and I met Ken Brockle, WA2FVB, and Dave Fiedler, who were my mentors. And I eventually convinced the administration there that they should really let me teach ham radio full time. And so I was able to put the basket weaving aside. And while I was there, I really decided, I'm like, okay, I don't want to stick with music education. It was good for a hobby, but I really did want to pursue engineering. But Montclair State, where I went, they didn't have an electrical engineering program. They had a physics program. So Ken Brockle recommended that that I get a physics degree because I didn't really want to change universities at that point, 3 years in. So I ended up adding a physics major. I stayed for another 3 years. So I spent 6 years in undergrad, and yeah, a long time, and graduated with 210 credits or something ridiculous. But I did get both a double major in music education and physics, and then Virginia Tech. When I was at the Hamvention, I decided to go to Hamvention in 2006, I think, 2005, 2006. And I met a bunch of students from Virginia Tech. And I said, yeah, I want to go pursue a PhD in electrical engineering. And I want to go someplace where they have a ham club already and where you can also go outdoors. And people at Virginia Tech said this is a great place. So I applied and they took me. And then I eventually ended up in the Super Darn Laboratory, which is a laboratory that uses HF radars to study the ionosphere. And that's where I got my master's and PhD. And that's also where I started HamSci. That was kind of interesting because I spent a long time in graduate school too. I loved college, I guess. So
That's
I
why you're a
spent
professor, right?
that's why I'm a professor. So I spent 9 years in grad school. I got to travel the world, and one of those trips, I found myself on Adak Island in the Aleutian Islands, in between mainland Alaska and Russia, and I met Ethan Miller, K8GU, and he introduced me. We were supposed to build a super darn radar there, which we did, and he also introduced me to the reverse beacon network then. And at that point, I said, "Oh, this is interesting. I wonder if we could just use this data and like write a paper showing space weather effects on that." And we did. I downloaded a bunch of reverse beacon network data, and I found a solar flare that wiped out all the communications in the RBN for that time, and we wrote it up and got it published in Space Weather Journal, which was great. And then a year or so later, I learned that some students were planning on studying the solar eclipse and the 2017 solar eclipse and its effects on the ionosphere. I said, "Oh, I bet we can use the RBN to study that too." And so I was able, and that's really where HamSci got started, trying to use ham radio to study the 2017 solar eclipse. And I decided that instead of having it just be for that one event, we could actually create a whole organization for it. So I spent a week over Thanksgiving break at my mom's dining room table where I should have been working on my PhD thesis, but instead I was making the HamSci website, and that's how that got started. And yeah, I kind of just kept going with it.
So do I understand then, Dr. Frissell, that you actually started HamSci?
That's right. Yes. So
I did not know that.
I was the
Wow.
main person to start it. I had some other people that helped me along with it. Magda Moses and Ward Silver and Bob McGuire and and Ethan Miller and those people. But I was the main person that kind of had the whole vision and put it together, made the website, wrote the objectives, structured everything.
Cool. So let's talk about that a wee bit. So what kind of detail a little bit better why you decided HamSci needed to happen?
Well, I was a graduate student working. The reason I became a graduate student in ionospheric physics was because I liked ham radio and I liked HF radio, and I thought this was an interesting thing to pursue. And I saw that, there are a whole bunch of professional physicists and electrical engineers that were using HF radio and studying the ionosphere that really didn't understand ham radio. And conversely, there were a lot of ham radio operators that had lots of expertise, but didn't really know how to interact with the professional community so much. But I knew they had a lot to offer if they talked to each other. And I knew that one thing I knew about ham radio operators is they're always so, passionate and willing to give back. And they're always just so interested in things that it just made sense to try to come up with some sort of project that would join the two together. And I'm probably the most well known of current projects to do this sort of thing. But if you look back in history, amateur radio has a long history of contributing to, professional science and vice versa. And there's books, if you go read Probing the Sky with Radio Waves, or if you look at some of the experiments that happened during the International Geophysical Year in 1957, there's a long history of all of this. But yeah, I guess we needed another group today to drive that forward again. And so HamSci happened.
Very nice. Very nice. So why don't you tell us a little bit about the experiments and the projects and how they're organized?
Okay, well, we have a lot of different experiments going on, some that are very, kind of publicly known on the website and some that aren't. And the way they're organized in a few different ways. I've so a lot of them stem from my different research projects that I've had to do over the years, and I've ended up writing grant proposals around, and others have come up from people saying, you should do this, or I'd really like to do this. So here's some examples. One is when I was a graduate student at Virginia Tech, my advisors turned me on to studying traveling ionospheric disturbances, medium scale traveling ionospheric disturbances, or MSTIDs. And that was a big topic of study with super darn radars. And I ended up writing a number of chapters of my dissertation and papers on that, and found, some very convincing evidence linking those MSTIDs with the polar vortex, and that became very well cited. So when it was natural for me to go on and keep pursuing traveling ionospheric disturbances outside of super darn, and I did that with ham radio as well. So when I got to the University of Scranton, I was encouraged to write an NSF career grant proposal, and I knew that you could see some large-scale traveling ionospheric disturbances in the RBN, PSK, and WhisperNet data. So I wrote a whole grant proposal around that, and so that got funded. And so now, we're working very actively on that project, and I'm planning on going to the RCA symposium with my graduate student, and hopefully we'll be able to present some of those results there. So that's one project. Then another project was the solar eclipses, and that was just kind of being in the right place at the right time. There were these major solar eclipses, both total and annular solar eclipses, one in 2017 and another in 2023 and another in 2024. And when I was a graduate student at Virginia Tech, I learned about the one in 2017 and, figured out how we could use the RBN and the ham radio data to do a study of that solar eclipse. And so we got that published in Geophysical Research Letters. We had gotten a small extension on it, or a supplement to a grant to support that. And that gave us a lot of, we got a lot of participation across the entire United States for that project. And then once that one was done, well, then the 2023 and 2024 solar eclipses were coming up. And we're like, well, we can't not do that now because everyone's expecting us to. So, and then I had a bunch of people that said, oh, in addition to doing the solar eclipse QSO party, why don't you do this, this, and this? And so then before you know it, you're writing proposals to support the eclipse. And then in between that, right after the first solar eclipse QSO party, Ward Silver said the next thing you should do is this personal space weather station. And before you know it, there was a grant call of opportunity from the National Science Foundation for a program called the Distributed Array of Small Instruments. So at one of the HamSci workshops, which also the HamSci workshop was a product of the Eclipse project as well. Someone told me, they're like, oh, now that you had the eclipse, you should actually organize a workshop. So we organized a workshop, and then we've been doing that every year. Now we're coming up to 9-10 years of doing that. And then after that workshop, they said, oh, you should, do this personal space weather station. We, gave a few talks about what it might be like. And then this National Science Foundation call came out for a distributed array of small instruments. I talked to all the people that came to the HamSci workshop that had ideas on how to do that. We wrote a proposal and we won. So, and that's kind of how it just kept going. So, yeah, I think, yeah.
No, go ahead.
I think one of the neat things is how we're able to take some of these ideas that different people have, and we're able to kind of amplify them through this. So for instance, one of my friends, Steve Serwin, WA5FRF, he said, for the solar eclipse, he wanted to just send linear chirps through a regular single sideband amateur radio, and then use the fact that you can get multipath that comes down, and you could look at the beat note interference on that and do remote sensing of the ionosphere. And so based on that time difference of arrival. And that turned out to work really well. I said, yes, Steve, you should go ahead and do that. And so he's really the one that came up with the idea and went and did that experiment. And now, and when he came up with that, we were writing a grant proposal. We included that in the grant. And then now he's actually working, he and another volunteer friend, Tom McMahon, myself and a few students, were preparing a manuscript to try to get published in a scholarly journal from that. So, again, just someone saw that we were doing this and we were able to use the HamSci platform to kind of make it a bigger deal than just someone, actually turn into a real experiment.
So, based on what you just told us about some of these projects, I'm curious to know, how does HamSci actually pick the projects to pursue? What are their criteria? Because I'm sure you probably get more requests than you can do.
Oh, we definitely get more requests than we can do. I think a lot of what has, the people in HamSci talk on a very regular basis. We have, 2 to 3 telecons a week. We have an annual HamSci workshop. We go to professional conferences, AGU, CEDAR, and we just talk and we say, oh, we think this is a good idea or that's a good idea. And then when we see something that we think really might be a good idea, we try to, or if we see an opportunity, we go write a proposal about it. And if those proposals, they really define what the project is going to be. So these grant proposals, it's really not just about the money. It's actually much more about, when you go and you write a grant proposal, you have to define your science objectives. You have to work out who's going to be doing what and how everything's going to be organized. So it's basically a project management plan, and it's a kind of a type of a contract and agreement. And so that process of writing those proposals with people kind of helps us to figure out where our projects are going to go.
Now, you said a couple of times neat ideas, but are there other criteria, like, for example, exploring new areas that aren't explored, or economic viability to actually create something that might be useful? I mean, are there other criteria besides just being interesting, if you know what I mean?
I think on one hand, I mean, for me, not particularly. I kind of go after things that are interesting to me, but that's not to say that they don't have other useful criteria. It's just that's not what draws me to them. I just find them interesting, and then I figure out, like, okay, this personal space weather station, I find it interesting. And yes, if we do create this, it will create something that will let people better sense the world around them. It could lead to maybe to new discoveries, because we're increasing the spatial sampling density and the time sampling density, and we're going to be creating projects that we're going to be pushing the bounds of what types of software-defined radios that amateurs are using, or what you can do with them. So all of these projects absolutely do have very practical impacts to them. And when we write these proposals, we do have to explain what that is. But that's not necessarily how I pick the projects. And a lot of it is kind of opportunity. It's like the eclipses are a perfect example of that. I just happened to be living in the right place at the right time, where 3 eclipses came over the United States within between 2017 and 2024, and they are viewed as a controlled experiment for the ionosphere. So there's very clear science goals of what science objectives of what you can do with them, and we know that it impacts HF radio communications. And so both the NASA and the National Science Foundation put out calls of opportunity that said, hey, look, these things are coming. We're looking for proposals on how to study them and how to collect data and get new science out of this, write proposals. And so it was, it was interesting, and it was an opportunity that really fit.
That makes sense. So maybe you could just give us a little more detail on one or two projects that were successful in your view, Dr. Frissell.
Well, I think all of the ones I've mentioned so far have been successful in many ways, and they're ongoing. You know, we have the the solar eclipse QSO party, the one in 2017. We got a really we were able to run the solar eclipse QSO party. We were able to see clear evidence of the eclipses in the reverse beacon network data. We were able to run a physics-based model of the ionosphere predicting what the eclipse should look like. We were able to do ray tracing through that model. We were able to compare the model to the data, and we were able to show really good agreement, and we got it all published in a very prestigious scholarly journal. And so that was fantastic. And then, I view it as successful because we were able to get a number of grants follow on to that for the 2023 and 2024 eclipse from both NASA and from the National Science Foundation. And so those results aren't published yet because we're still working on them. We have a postdoc, Dr. Kuldeep Pandey, who's at the New Jersey Institute of Technology. He's funded under a couple of those grants, and he's actively analyzing the new RBN WhisperNet PSK reporter data that we've collected from that and working that up into manuscripts. We have the experiment I just talked about by Steve Serwin with the HF time difference of arrival. So, those are building on previous successes. Similarly, with the personal space weather station, we've gotten just beautiful observations from the HF Doppler experiments, the GRAPE 1s and the GRAPE 2s, and now we have thanks to Phil Karn, KA9Q, and Rob Robinette, AI6VN, we have the great RX888 KA9Q radio personal space weather station. That's a software-defined radio receiver that we're starting to deploy across the United States, and that's what we just installed at K3LRs. And so that I think is just a really neat success because it can collect lots of fascinating data in very interesting ways. And, we're starting to work with, how do we process it and interpret it. And Gwyn Griffiths, G3ZIL, he's doing a lot of great work helping us to analyze that data.
Have there been any projects that failed? And if so, was there some do differently that you learned from that?
Oh, absolutely. But it's funny, some of the same projects I just mentioned as successes are also some of the same that are failures. So
how was that possible?
So I think the personal space weather station is a great example of that, because if you look at the original personal space weather station grant, we said we were going to develop an FPGA based radio called the Tangerine SDR. And for all sorts of different reasons, it never materialized. There was COVID, there were some personnel issues, there were chip shortages. It was just all sorts of different things. But so one thing that was really good is that when we wrote that original proposal, we were going to develop the personal space weather station in a couple of different ways. We said we were going to develop a low-cost version of it, which is just based on a simple low IF receiver that John Gibbons, N8OBJ, developed at Case Western Reserve University. And this is a very simple receiver that just takes the Leo Bodner GPSDO, and you set that to, say, 9,999 kilohertz, and you mix that in with a signal from an HF antenna. So what I'll do is it will mix down 10 megahertz WWV to a 1 kilohertz audio tone, and then you can feed that into a sound card, and then that can go into a Raspberry Pi, and you can sample it, and you can get these really cool HF Doppler observations of WWV. That's all GPS disciplined, GPS disciplined and everything, and just really neat measurements. And so we said we were going to develop that at the same time that we were going to develop this Tangerine SDR that was this more full-featured software-defined radio that should be able to do everything that Grape could do and much more. Well, it turned out that the Tangerine SDR just kept lagging and lagging and lagging. And John Gibbons originally did not want to deploy this Grape 1 because it was really just a prototype. But it worked well enough to get us data. So we started sending those out to people. John was kind enough to let that out into the world, and we sent that to people, and that's what gave us the first observations of the 2023 eclipse. And really, it was the Grape project at Case Western that saved the entire Daisy One Track One project, because that's what gave us all the main data that we could point to. We could say, oh yeah, look, we have deployed personal space weather stations. We do have good observations, even though part of that project wasn't going along well. Fast forward a few years, while we still wanted a software-defined radio solution. And this is where Rob Robinette, AI6VN, tapped me on the shoulder at one of the Hamventions, and he said, I have the solution to your problem with the SDR. He said, if you go take an RX888 and you take Phil Karn K9Q web, K9Q radio, his software, he's like, you can do what you want to do essentially with the Tangerine SDR, but even more so with this hardware you can buy right now. And Rob Robinette, really pushed Phil Karn to develop K9Q radio in certain ways that really were tailored to what we needed for our project, and also for Rob's interest, which is developing the Whisper Demon software. The Whisper Demon software will take the Whisper decoder and it'll run it on all of the HF bands simultaneously. And at the same time as you're doing that, it can also decode all the FT8 simultaneously across all the bands. And at the same time as you do that, I also said, Rob, hey, can you make your system also record data to look like these grapes on these other channels? And he programmed that in. And so it did all of that simultaneously on all the bands. And before you knew it, we had, kind of what we needed. And so that's a project that, did fail in one sense, but we were able to, what would we do differently? I don't think I'd necessarily do anything differently. What we did was we built into the project kind of these fail safes, and it's like, okay, this didn't work. We have this other thing that is a success, and we'll build off of that. And then, they kind of build on each other.
So it's very iterative, isn't it?
Yeah.
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 So how do hams or amateur scientists get involved? And are there any prerequisites for getting involved with HamSci?
We don't have any prerequisites per se. The best way to get involved is you can go to our website, hamsci.org, and there's a big blue button that says Join HamSci, and you can join our Google group, and you can just participate there. You can post questions. You can just follow along. We have a couple of telecons each week. On Monday nights at 9 p.m. Eastern, we have a joint telecon with the Tapper group, and that one's very focused on hardware engineering for the personal space weather station. And then on Thursday mornings at 10 a.m. Eastern, we have the personal space weather station operations telecon. So there are Zoom telecons. The links are publicly posted, so anyone can hop on and join and talk with us. We also have now we're going to make it the first Thursday of the month during the academic year. We also have a 4 p.m. telecon on Thursday afternoon, so you can participate in those. We do have some public events, operating events. I guess the biggest one we're doing right now is the Meteor Scatter QSO party. We had one Meteor Scatter QSO party at the end of August, and we have another one coming up in December. So for the Geminids and the Perseids meteors. And so that's something where, you can just be an operator, and you can, if you have a 10 meter or a 2 meter rig and can operate, WSJT, you can participate in this Meteor Scatter QSO party, and all the information's on the website. We have an annual workshop or conference. And so if you're doing any sort of study on your own, you can actually, there'll be a call for abstracts probably in late December, early January, and then our conference is probably going to be in the middle to the end of March this coming year. We're working on finalizing those dates and locations now. But we've had people that I've never met before that just submitted an abstract to that conference, and we accepted them, and then we started doing some things together. Or some people will go to our website and they'll look up, how do you put together a personal space weather station? They might email us for some tips, and we'll tell them, okay, here's the equipment you buy, and we'll try to walk you through the rest of the process. So
It
and
sounds like
yeah,
people can be involved in different levels of intensity, I guess. Yeah.
absolutely, yeah. Yeah, so we have
That's
some
nice.
people that are just like, that are data collectors. They set up equipment, they let it run, they collect data, send it to the website. Um, we also have people that are actively like, designing new hardware that we're going to use. We have people that are actually doing data analysis and trying to design their own experiments. So a lot of
And,
different.
and some of those are that you just described, Dr. Fissell, are some new projects. Are there any others you'd like to share with us in the future?
New projects. I think those are the main ones for now. We have a number of other data analysis projects that are looking at the again RBN PSK reporter WhisperNet data. I think we're going to see further development of what we call PILAP, which is it the ray tracing system based that predicts where HF radio signals go through the ionosphere. Um, I think we're going to see some more development of that system in the future.
Interesting. Thank you for
Yeah.
that. One last question, and then we'll start to open it up for the audience, and that is, what advice would you give to young people? Is getting a ham license worth it, and how should they pursue their interest in science?
Oh, I absolutely believe getting a ham radio license is worth it. I think before we started the formal interview, I was saying, I teach a foundations of physics and engineering class, and I'm now requiring all of my students to get their technician license for their first year of being a physics or engineering student at the University of Scranton, and that's going to be the final exam for the class. And I think the ham radio license is great for so many reasons. I mean, one is, it does give you just a very good foundation, like introductory level of, the language of engineering, not just radio, but, you have to learn the basic schematics. You need to learn basics of metric and SI prefixes, just a lot of fundamental engineering that applies to much more than just radio. And of course, includes the radio. And when you get your ham radio license, you now actually have a credential. So even if you are, a middle schooler or an elementary schooler, or a high schooler, you may not have a degree, you may not, actually have an engineering degree, but you actually have a real credential, a real license that you can say, look, I've earned this. And I think that really helps with networking too, because you can go to radio clubs around the nation. You can join this organization, the Radio Club of America. You can go join your local radio club. You meet other people who are hams, and all of a sudden you say you have a ham radio license, and you can be talking to an engineer or a scientist who's also a ham and has years of experience, and all of a sudden you have something to talk to them about. And I think it really opens a lot of doors that way. I think a lot of, in terms of my advice, I think a lot of, I really think there's a lot of importance on kind of following what your passion is. I know that for me that has paid off, and I know that sometimes people say, oh, you have to be more practical about things, or you have to, you can't just do whatever you want. Well, okay, that's true, but I think if you're able to follow your passion, you can bring an extra energy and creativity to what you're doing that you would not otherwise be able to do. And I think if you are creative, you are able to find practical ways of making those things work. And as I said, like when I pick out my projects, I often pick them out because they interest me first, and then second, then I'm able to go and say, okay, how do I make this work practically in my life? And that's even how I've made my job work. I'm like, I became this because I like radio first, and then I said, okay, now how do I like radio? How do I actually make a living out of it? How do I make it work? And I've been able to do it. So, well, it's not always easy. It's not
No,
always easy, but it
true.
does. But the passion does give me some extra drive to figure out the difficulties.
Well, that's good advice, and your passion is definitely showing, which
Thanks.
is a good thing. So, quick break here. Barney, if you can get ready soon to join us. In November, RCA is going to be having its annual meeting and technical symposium and awards banquet. That's coming up in November, the last weekend before Thanksgiving weekend. Of interest is I'm in the process of writing another book report. I've been writing several over the past few years, and this one it was given to me. It's a British writer, and it's a very interesting combination of two things that interest me, one being ham radio, but the other being World War II. So the author's father ended up being a major in the British Signal Corps, and he was posted overseas during the war, and he was in Egypt and Greece, and he did some secret communications, which included mimicking a German Abwehr agent. The Abwehr was the intelligence, sort of the MI5, MI6, or CIA of the German organization. And he mimicked this for quite a long time, and they never got onto him at all. And all the communications were in CW. So this book is very interesting, got a lot of pictures in it. I'll be writing a report on it. You'll probably see it in the spring proceedings, but it's another one of those interesting books. They just keep coming out about World War II or similar, and people working in wireless. So without further ado, we're going to turn this over to the audience, and you get a chance to ask Dr. Frissell questions, and Barney will moderate, and I'll listen.
There have been a lot of comments coming up here, but not a lot of questions so far.
Uh-oh.
But I have one thought occurred to me. Before we started, you were talking about, as you just said, getting an amateur radio license as a requirement. Do you see any trend? And what I think about is not just getting licenses, but how do you keep people involved? How do you get them more involved in just after they get the license? Do you see any trends of younger people, what really they get enthused about with amateur radio? Obviously, the people you get in ham side, that's clearly a direction. But beyond that, do you see any other trends of newly licensed hams, things that are really, are there passion these days?
Oh, there's absolutely passion. I think the thing, it's funny. I think there's different things speak to different people. So I have some students that I can think of at least two of them right now that have just showed up to the ham radio station, and they're just like, I want to do this, and they hang out there all the time, and they're just so interested in the radio and what's going on in there, and they just love it. And I don't know why they do. I mean, I think it's something that I have in me too. I just found it really fascinating. And so what I do with them is I really just try to, make it very accessible to them, make it welcoming, make it so, yeah, if they have ideas, they want to pursue something, yes, you can go try that. We can, go ahead, use the different antennas in the system. So there are some students that just seem to click, seem to really like it. I think other students, there's another group of students I think do get interested in it, but it takes a little bit more time to really show them why it's useful, show them that there's other people that are interested in it. And I think what we did at K3LR, a few weeks ago, I got to see you, Barney, at at the K3LR station, and I brought a number of students over to Tim's station, and it was just wonderful because, at first with the students, I showed them the whole research project. I showed them, we had them help install the personal space weather station equipment. They had some understanding of what's going on in terms of what a software-defined radio receiver is and what a the system can do. But then, they've seen what you can do at the ham radio station at W3USR at the University of Scranton too. But, when we were able to bring them into Tim's station, first he gave them a whole tour of all the antenna systems out there and all of the engineering that went into that. And then he had them all go into the station and gave them a tour of the inside of the station. And finally, they got to sit down next to experienced operators, and the experienced operators helped them to call CQ, and they were able to make, 500 QSOs in an afternoon or something. I think that really help to give them an understanding of what's actually going on and why this is fun. And I think that's the trick, is to try to make it fun for the students and figure out why they enjoy it. So that social aspect, I think, is a big part of it.
And that's something I suppose all of us who are licensed need to keep in mind with newly licensed people. A couple of questions have popped up though, so let's head over to those. What kind of broadband antennas do you use with your space weather station receiver?
So the ones that we're distributing with the Daisy 2 project are primarily the DX Engineering RF, the RSEAV. Let me get it up exactly. DXE, come on, computer. RSEAV. Yeah, we are primarily using the DX Engineering Active Vertical RSEAV-1 antenna. So it's a short active vertical with a little buffer amplifier on the bottom. That's the primary one we're deploying. We also have some experimentals that were experimental antennas that we're using as well. There's something called developed by Glenn Elmore and 6GN called the single antenna system. It's like a high impedance vertical dipole with a amplifier in the middle. So we're using that as well. So those are the main ones that we're using right now.
Next question. What impact to your research do you anticipate given the recent reduction in NSF funding?
I really don't know. It's hard to tell. I can say that I've been fortunate so far that the grants that I have been awarded have stayed in place, and I hope they continue to do so. And I have had some other grant proposals recently selected that we're waiting for them to be awarded right now. So I think time will tell.
And some of the interesting questions pop up here. I'll throw this one out. Do you know where Wilkes-Barre, PA is?
I do know where Wilkes-Barre, PA is. In fact, I am a member of the Murgas Amateur Radio Association, which is located in Wilkes-Barre, PA. Okay. So it's about a half hour south of Scranton.
Yeah. What do you find for the demographics of the ham side participants? Are they younger, older, mixture?
So I would say that most of the people that come up to HamSci are mostly older, retired sort of people that have been hams for a long time, and that does make up a large amount of our demographics. But we do have an active student base as well, because both at my university, University of Scranton, our collaborating institutions, Case Western Reserve University, New Jersey Institute of Technology, University of Alabama, all of those institutions actively involve students in our projects. And so that really helps to bring a nice influx of younger students into amateur radio and our group. And I can say it's working. One of the students that I started with at the University of Scranton, she is now pursuing her PhD in the Super Darn Lab at Virginia Tech right now. And she, she's active in their group down there. And a few of our students landed on the cover of the QST magazine this August. And so that was really neat. So we do get a mixture. And today I got just an email from a community college student out in Kansas that's interested in participating. So we get a range.
That made me think. I'll throw one of mine in here quickly. Are there job opportunities for these young people going through learning all this stuff? Is this providing the background they need to get jobs out in society right now?
I believe so. The work that they're doing here can either be very focused on, of course, they can go pursue research jobs in the ionosphere or in radio science. And, I do know some, I talked to some people up at Lincoln Labs saying that they would potentially hire people. I know that I've have a student that is, there might be a job for him at Johns Hopkins Applied Physics Lab after this. So I know those types of jobs are available. But beyond that, what the skills that you learn in doing ham sci can be broadly applied to, all sorts of different parts of engineering. So we have some students that were trained as electrical engineers that are now working more in, I think they're working more in electrical systems design and for commercial properties. So we have some students who got employed doing that. So there are absolutely, and I think there are other, possibilities, like if students want to go into broadcast engineering, I do believe the opportunities are out there.
That's promising to hear. Question about how do you protect against false or bogus data entering into your experimental results?
Well, that's a good question. I think, whenever you are working with the data and trying to publish it, you have to look at it very carefully and try to say, does this make sense? And one of the biggest examples of that is trying to work with the WWV data. The problem with WWV is there's also WWVH, and they're both on 2.5, 5, 10, 15 megahertz, and they're very hard to disambiguate. And so one way you have to look at it is you have to, in addition to just looking at the data, you might have to look at models to say, okay, does the model say that it's likely that the signal from WWV gets the receiver that you're looking at, or is it WWVH? And there's a couple different types of models. So that's one way you can look at it. You can do some statistical analysis to say, okay, are these outliers just outliers, or are they, or are they significant? So I think it really comes down to careful data analysis.
There is a odd question here, but it popped up twice, and it's from AC2GL. He wonders whether you have any idea where he misplaced his Grape 1 kit.
I don't know where you misplaced your Grape 1 kit. Is it a Grape 1 kit that we were supposed to send you, or is it one that you have?
I don't know. That was literally the question.
Okay, yeah, I see the question there. I don't know the answer.
Okay. Do you see any practical applications for modes such as FT8? Could there be reliable data transmission using HF bands?
Yeah, I would think so. I mean, they are, HF bands are used for reliable data transmission all of the time. The airliners use it. There's something called HFDL, high frequency data link, which transmits basically like telemetry data or location data about airliners, and that's the KA9Q web Whisper Daemon system that we're using as the personal space weather station can decode that. So they use that commercially now. And then the military, Department of Defense, they use HF as a backup communications. and including digital modes. And then, of course, if you use systems like WinLink, that's reliable HF digital communication. So there's lots of reliable HF digital communications out there.
There are a couple questions here concerning the international aspects of HAMSci. Both the people internationally get involved. Are any of the projects or activity going on in other countries or just North America?
No, there definitely are people in other countries. One of our biggest contributors is Gwyn Griffiths, G3ZIL. He's a retired oceanographer over in the United Kingdom. He's also a member of the RSGB propagation committee, and he's just an outstanding data analyst. So he's actively working on it. We have a student in Egypt who's been participating with us. So we do get international students, international participation as well.
Comment here about AI. Do you use it at all?
I use it a little bit. So I use ChatGPT sort of in the same way that I would use Google. If I'm like trying to look for coding solutions or how to solve something, I might, instead of Googling it, I might ask ChatGPT. I'm not, it does help me with my research a little bit. I'm not a heavy user of it. I do, I'm trying to like at least use it enough to be aware of what it can do. I think there is some, there are people who are trying to do more with it. So I know Andrew Rodlin, KC2G, he's been active in working with some AI approaches to his website.
There was another question commenting here, and I feel like I should remember more of this, but the question about Dr. Collins' voice announcement on WWV.
Yeah, so a few years ago, Christina Collins, KD8OXT, came up with a waveform to send on WWV, and that's been transmitting ever since. And I think one of the there's still a group that meets on Zoom every month or two that talks about that. And I think one of the things that did come out of that waveform was actually this HFTDOA experiment that we're working on the paper right now. It's not really using that particular waveform, but some of the ideas that went into this other experiment that we are working on writing up right now.
Next question pops up here concerning the growth of HAMSci. Its structure changing, evolving as and assuming it will get larger.
Yes, it definitely will need to be organized in some sort of a different way. I think even at my own university and with my own job, I think I'm kind of reaching the level of what I can do as just a single professor organized, in a regular professor position. And so I am trying to figure out and pursue ways of at least organizing my job differently or structuring my job differently. I think there's some potential to do that. And then, following on with that, we may see how HAMSci is organized differently.
Another question popped up, but from N0SR, live close to Fort Collins WWV transmitter site. We have our annual special event at the beginning of October. Would it be beneficial for me to run a PSWS?
So the answer is very possibly. We do have a site that's already being run very close to WWV. That's basically, like ground wave to WWV. So we have a control site already there. Certainly having a second site is always a useful thing. And even a third site, because if one of them goes down, it's always good to have, a backup or some corroboration. One of the things that's nice about having that station that is so close to WWV is it really serves as a control. So we want to make sure that our system does actually monitor WWV correctly. We want to make sure that WWV is operational when we think it is, and having that system there is very helpful.
One of the sides I'll mention here is one of the advantages of the RCA annual meeting is several years ago when we were out in Denver at a meeting, we had a number of us had a tour of WWV out there, and it was a very interesting day. Side idea about what happens at RCA meetings.
Yeah.
Next question. Are there opportunities for ham-sci projects in interdisciplinary fields? Perhaps something different from the obviously related fields, such as ionospheric physics and radio? If so, where might these opportunities lie?
I certainly think there can be. You know, on a fundamental level, if you go to the HamSci website, we have 3 major goals, and they're right on the front of the website. The first one is to advance scientific research and understanding through amateur radio activities. 2 is to encourage the development of new technologies to support this research. And 3 is to provide educational opportunities for the amateur community and the general public. So, I mean, if it falls within those 3 main objectives, I view that there is a place in HamSci for that particular activity. So there's nothing there that says specifically it has to be ionospheric and HF. I mean, advancing scientific research and understanding through amateur radio activities that can just be, you know, that can fall under a number of different categories. So I think one thing that we've done is, you know, if people want to use the HamSci platform and kind of use it as a way of organizing their project, they can certainly contact me and we can talk about the possibility of promoting your project on the HamSci website and how that might work, or even just like putting a news post up about it.
Another question. Any unexpected results, alleged new science theories?
I don't think we've had any real like new science theories per se yet, specifically with HamSci. I think one thing I'm working on right now is with these large scale traveling ionospheric disturbances that I'm looking at with the ham radio data, that I think the results we're finding shows that they have a stronger link to the lower atmosphere dynamics than was previously expected. I think that is surprising, but we don't have that published in the peer-reviewed literature yet. We're working on that, but I think that would be a very novel result once we get that done. But I think my graduate student, Diego Sanchez, KD2RLM, he's been working a lot on this with me, and I think we do have convincing evidence of that, but we do have to get it through peer-reviewed publication.
And I see the link to HamSci was just posted for everyone to, for those who want to follow up on this.
Thank you.
I've run out of questions, John.
I noticed.
But the only, I'll throw one out here. Nathaniel, is there anything in the back of your head that you're willing to share, that just one of those crazy thoughts you haven't really had time to pursue?
Oh my gosh, I don't know. I think one question that I'm constantly thinking about is how do I organize this better? I think, you know, what we have is absolutely working in that we have, you know, really these grant proposals are what kind of structures our organization, because that's where we lay out how everyone participates. But yeah, there's a lot of people who want to participate, and trying to keep that structure all going is really it's an interesting problem. But that's one thing I'm trying to figure out, and I think I'm very interested. It'll be very, you know, there's actually a lot of data we have that we're collecting right now. If you go to psws.hamsci.org, and I should warn you, well, if you go to hamsci.org and you click on the data tab, there's links to the different data sources that we are posting to. And I should warn you that the second one for the personal space weather station, they're actually migrating the server for that today. So to a new upgraded server. So there's going to be some that may not work properly right away, give it a week or so. But, I think it'd be really interesting, for people to go through this data and see if they find, what could people in the general public do with this data. I think that's really an interesting thing. There's a lot of data there. We don't have time to look at all of it. You can go download it. You can present at one of our virtual telecons. You can also submit it as an abstract to the HamSci workshop, and we'd love to see what people do with this data.
We've got two more questions.
Yeah, one more popped up here. Actually, yeah, two popped up. How many raw data points were collected from the last solar eclipse QSO party?
Oh, geez, that's a tough question. I have one plot here, which I used to quote as a number. And this is just a summary plot from the April 2024 total solar eclipse. But for one 24-hour observation period on the eclipse day, there were 52.7 million RBN, PSK reporter, and WhisperNet spots collected and plotted on this one plot.
That's great.
Yeah, and that's just over the United States. That's a lot of data points.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And one more, somewhat unrelated. Are you involved in any VHF, UHF repeater digital communications? C4FM, DMR?
Yeah, I'm not doing anything scientifically with it, but certainly from an amateur radio perspective, University of Scranton W3USR does have a UHF repeater, thanks to Jeff DiPolo, WN3A. We do get on, C4 FM with the Azu Fusion. My student Owen KD3 ALD, he's really into DMR, so we do, and we use some of this stuff. Yeah, so more on the amateur side of things, not on the science side.
Okay, well, we had a really good session. Thank you, Barney. Thank you, Dr. Frissell. Covered a lot of ground, and hopefully those of you that are so inclined will join HamSci and become more in science experimentation than just ham radio.
Thank you so much, John.
Marriage.
Thank you, Barney.
You are very welcome. Thank you, everybody, for attending tonight. We'll have one more session this year, which will be in December, and the speaker we are working on right now. But if anybody has any suggestions on topics and or speakers, please send an email to Amy, and she will forward it to myself. Take care. Good night, everybody, and pleasant dreams, because it's definitely bedtime for me.
Me too.